Hi there. Most of you probably lost some time today or yesterday doing pretty much the same thing, waiting in a line. Maybe it was a supermarket line, you lost 5 minutes at the cash. Maybe it was a Starbucks line, you were hanging around watching perfect lattes get made while you stood in line. Maybe it was something worse, like an airport line. Could have been a traffic line, which we get stuck in for hours, which is just a different kind of line. Only we call them lanes. Or it could have been a phone line. These invisible phone lines, we suddenly don't realize they're lines, but actually they are, because you're listening to a message, say something like an automated message, say, all our agents are currently busy ignoring other customers. You know, these are like really aggravating little bits of life we don't pay much attention to, but you get more aggravated if you understood just how much of our life is actually lost in line. Experts in this field say we lose billions, trillions, maybe quadrillions of hours of time every year across the planet just waiting in lines. The world's leading expert, Richard Larson at MIT, a professor who's known as Dr. Q around the world, he estimates we lose 1 to 2 years of our lives if we're commuters in line. What an incredible waste of human effort and energy we just don't think about, you know? I know a lot about this because I spent the last 2 years working on a film called The Taming of the Q. I ran on CBC ran on television quite recently. For the film, I traveled the world. I studied line etiquette in various countries because it differs. I talked to every expert I could find, from the Q guru to Britain's famous, well, he's the Q guru in England, and I talked to Dr. Q and him and many others. And I stood in some humongous lines you really wouldn't want to stand in. But you know, I came out of it all kind of hopeful when it was over, because what I realized is, as the film went on, is that technology is beginning to conquer the queue. And it's just possible we are reaching the end of the line. That's the name of my talk, the end of the line. But I won't talk about that until I give you some idea of how we ended up standing in lines to start with, okay? For most of human history, we did not stand in lines, we stood in malls, with the biggest, ugliest guy pushed to the front. It wasn't first come, first served. It's what I call worst come, first served. This changed dramatically with a revolution. And the revolution was the French Revolution in the late 1700s. Liberty, equality, fraternity. To express equality, they created something called a bread queue, where everybody could democratically line up, and the first person who arrived would actually get served. And, supposedly anybody could be in that line, though the noblemen obviously had their own store of bread. The British were just across the channel. They noticed Frenchmen lining up in this weird way. They said, "What's going on? What are they doing?" They came to investigate, and they found out it was called a queue, which is French for pigtail. It sort of looked like a pigtail. And so over the next 150 years, this idea began to spread, first to France, then England, then across the world, really North America. We all know what it is. The heyday of the queue was probably World War II, where it was, there was rationing. And in England in particular, people stood in these lines because of shortages, and there was a great sense of common spirit, standing equal to equal in a line. It was egalitarian. But by the 1950s, the world is fed up, and people were fed up standing in lines. So this new science started to develop called queue engineering. And the first rule of queues, actually, it started in a very strange place. It was developed in elevators. You wouldn't expect that. But in the 1950s, high-rises were going up everywhere. And the only way up was these very slow original elevators. And people were going crazy. We stood in a line. We stood on the floor forever. They had elevator rage, like we have car rage today. They couldn't figure out how to solve it. So one engineer had a brilliant idea. He came up and he plastered giant mirrors on every floor, wall-sized mirrors. And then eventually they went inside elevators, and you notice we still have elevators beside mirrors, and we have mirrors in elevators today. Anyway, people suddenly started to use these mirrors. They would look in the mirror and comb their hair, and they would, examine themselves. They would check out other people. They would flirt. And queue rage disappeared overnight. And this was the start of the very first rule of queues, which is occupied time in line feels shorter than unoccupied line. Seems unimportant, but it actually just played a big role in how queues developed. First place to take it over was Disney. I call him the Lion King. Here years and years and years, they just developed things. First, they put clowns in line to entertain you. They had numbers of what number you were in line. Kids had games in line. They kind of transformed queues. Everybody borrows something, even supermarkets. Like supermarkets suddenly developed this idea that you used to stand just at the cash register, then the counter grew. Why? So you could unload your groceries. The other person in front of you was standing there because while you're unloading your groceries, you're busy. You're occupied. You're not thinking you're in line. Now we have 2 people sometimes unloading. We'd be happy if there were 50 people, all of us unloading at the same time. That would make us happier, which is kind of what self-checkout is now, these machines where you check yourself out. Experts would tell you it makes no sense. It takes 30% more on average for a person to bag their own groceries and check out, but you don't notice it because you're occupied. You're busy doing things. It feels shorter. That's kind of the basis of queue psychology. Another interesting experiment some of you have lived through, if you're as old as me, in the about the 60s, we stood in one gigantic line, like a Soviet line, and we stared at the back of somebody's head. It was depressing. Then they had this brilliant idea we live with now, multiple choice queues. You go to a supermarket, there's 5 lines, you can take your pick, right? And there's always a different cash. Well, we got so excited when I was 16 or 17, we could pick our own queues. It was like Qtopia. But as the novelty wore off over the years, and Q scientists studied it, they discovered that actually people are quite unhappy in these lines. They're occupied. They don't enjoy it. And the reason they don't enjoy it, well, this is the reason. Q rule number 2. The other line always looks like it's moving faster. You sit there and you say, why did I pick this line? Idiots. Why did I end up in the line with a woman, collecting 17 lottery tickets? And some guy looks like he's stocking up enough food for Armageddon. Change lines, and you wish you stayed in the first line. You look back, you look forth, you get line envy, you get line rage. It's quite depressing. And the same principle, interestingly, applies to highways and car lineups. What do we do? The other lane always looks faster. How do we drive? We go back and forth. We keep changing lanes. That one's faster. That one's faster. We move across, and that's how we drive. But road engineers would tell you this is insane. That's the fact that we keep weaving and stopping and starting. This is what slows roads down. This is what creates traffic. But we seem to be incapable of not doing this. Human beings just can't stay in their lane. I'll talk more about that later, but I'll just say that there is one solution in standing lines that may play a role in roads eventually. There's a new queue coming in the last few years, invented by the Q guru in England, and it's spreading everywhere. You've seen it here, look for it. It's one big line again, like I had in the 60s, but now when you get to the end, you split to 7 cashiers, right? So if you get lottery lady in front of you, you just move on to the next cash, right? You don't have to be envious. That's science at work. Okay, so I could tell you I can tell you many stories about Q experiments, but I'm going to move one more way before I go to the future. I did travel around a lot to investigate line etiquette in different countries. For instance, I went to India. That was an experience. I've been there before, but I'd never studied lines. India is like, I was in Mumbai, 25 million people in one city. That's 2/3 of Canada's country. And they're all competing for the same services, so you can imagine the lineups, huge lineups for auto rickshaws, for buses, for trains. There are even giant lineups for water queues in the slums, which is really difficult. People don't have enough water. So you can imagine that the attitude changes a bit. When I first got there, I stood in lines and I left a kind of customary North American space to be polite. Well, 2-3 people would fill it right away. So I asked some Indian experts on this, journalists and authors, a particular guy named Jerry Pinto, who's written a lot on queues. He's quite famous, and I said, what's going on? And he said, look, when you leave a space in a line, you're sending a message. I don't value where I am in this line. I don't value this spot. And there's a lot of people out there working 12-hour days, trying to get home to feed 9 kids. They look at you and they think, well, he doesn't need it. I need it. I value that spot. And they'll step in. He said, so it's partially a first-come, first-served system, but it's also based on need, right? So I learned to squeeze in line mainly before I left in Mumbai. I learned how to get right up behind the person behind you. Indians, according to Pinto and a couple of other people I spoke to, they spend an average of 1 month a year in queues, and they say it's 24-hour day queues. So it really is terrible loss of time. For them, they get impatient. The other country I went to was the opposite, England. which is kind of the queue craziest country in the world, strangely enough. They actually kind of like queues, you find out. When you talk to people in line, they're all, really polite. When you say, do you mind? Oh, no, I like standing in queues. It's what we're good at in England. It's egalitarian. Everybody's in a queue equally. Rich, poor, we're all standing here together. They go back to the war, that sense of common purpose, and they always tell you, the rest of Europe, they can't line up properly. France, Italy, it's like a mob. We know how to line up properly. I went to their greatest line, which is Wimbledon. That's their most famous queue. It's called The Queue. Signs everywhere, The Queue. 10,000 people lining up for standing room only tickets 5 hours a day, every day. We'd never do that because people would get very upset. They would miss the line. They would miss the queue. So this is 10,000 people standing there because they want to stand there because they're having a good time. And just one other example before I switch off. There's an example of, there's a famous classic photo, 2011 London riots. People smash a hole in an electronics store and their thieves are looting it. But how do they loot? They loot in British style. I think they loot in British style. Yes, back we go. They're all standing in a queue, waiting their turn to loot politely. Anyway, so I guess the ultimate question you get here is, do we all have to become like the British and love to queue, even for looting? Or is there some way to sort of undo the queue? And I'm glad to say that after 2 years of research, I came out of this feeling that a lot of advances are being made in this thing, and human time may soon be saved. I'll start with just an example. This is just a typical American. Come on, baby. Okay, that's a hospital sign outside an American hospital. Waiting time for emergency, 12 minutes. If it said 90 minutes, you'd move on to the next hospital, right? It's technology starting to help us out. Know how long a line is going to take. You see this more and more in restaurant reservations, right? You see lines outside restaurants all the time. We don't see them that often anymore. Maybe bars on occasion, but restaurants, you show up. You take a number, they take your name, your number, they phone you 45 minutes later when your table's ready. You guys use apps, apps like Ritual. You want to order takeout food, you order it in advance, and somebody will beep you 30 seconds before it's ready. You show up and you pick it up. No more lineups, so you won't have latte lineups anymore. A really big difference, the phone system, the automated phone system. You're hearing more and more messages like, you are number 245 in line. Your wait will be 1.7 hours, but if you leave your number, we'll call you back. I think phone lineups, automated phone lineups, they'll be gone. In 10 years, it'll be some kind of ancient, archaic. Stores. You want to see the future of stores? Go to Apple. Apple's it's like crowded with customers, right? But you don't see them line at the cash register because there's no cash register. Your salesman is your cashier, just kind of swipes your card. You're out the door. Experts told me every store will be like this in 10 years. This is just the future of stores. You're not going to have lineups, except maybe when you're in a supermarket with a giant basket of goods, it's more complicated. But there's all kinds of apps coming out in Asia. They're testing where you're just going to wave your phone at the goods, at your bananas. They're going to be billed. You're going to find it the moment you get there. Store lineups are going to be, I think, a thing of the past, and not just the future. That leaves the really big problem, which is the problem of car lineups, the one we spend the most time in. But there's actually pretty interesting things happening there too. When you can see one, you just pull your phone out when you're driving these days. You look at Waze or something, and you see a red line for traffic. You take another route. Right? Technology figuring out where we should go. And the great revolution coming in cars is self-driving cars, because they're going to take the human being out of driving, and we, as I said before, are the problem. We're bad drivers. I talked to this guy, to every road engineer I talked to, and every author I talked to who studied traffic told me the same thing. We're bad drivers. We think we're good drivers. Human beings can't drive. We weave back and forth. We talk to each other. We stop. We start. We speed out. We rubberneck. We shouldn't be on the road. We're the reason we have traffic jams. Once self-driving cars actually work, and there's a lot of them, they're going to stay in the same lane. They're going to drive in one lane. They're capable of driving 80 miles an hour at the same time, this far apart, communicating electronically. They'll spread out on every road, communicating. And, traffic engineers and traffic experts, a guy, Tom Vander, wrote a book called Traffic. It's the seminal book on traffic in America. He estimates in 20 years, you're gonna have 3 times as much space on the road as now, and that would mean no more traffic jams unless we're stupid enough to buy 3 times more cars. Human beings are unpredictable. So I think everywhere you look, you see, these things are happening. There's a revolution here that's taking away a problem. We don't recognize the problem, but it is a problem, and it's vanishing. And I think there's always going to be some kind of line. You're going to have, the iPhone 10 line, which is a thrill. It says, yeah, I stood there. There'll be iPhone 300. And people will be standing in the iPhone 300 line, I suppose, just for fun, right? Shortages, Venezuelan food shortage, Indian overcrowding, these are more difficult. It'll take more time to deal with that. But I think 2 generations down the road, I think, people in their 20s are going to look back at the idea of lining up on a daily basis for anything as being some kind of archaic human activity, like an oxen burrow or something, And I think, I think the final one now is if we're going to get rescued, so to speak, rescued. So I guess my final message would be, really honestly, after centuries of losing our time, we are finally getting to the end of the line, and I am getting